Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Psychocinematic. Today, I'm covering my first ever short film on this podcast called 12 Kilometers, directed by Mike Pecci. And as always, spoilers ahead. So first and foremost, if you want to watch this movie, you need to DM the director, Mike Pecci, on Instagram and tell him your top 3 favorite horror movies, because he is the gatekeeper to this movie. You can't find it anywhere else. And that might sound a bit intimidating. It was for me, because I was like, well, what if he doesn't like the horror movies that I chose? Then that's a giant slap in the face and I'll feel pretty stupid. But the ones that I sent him, I prefaced it with, I really don't know if I have a top 3 favorite horror movies, but some of my favorite ones as of late were Get Out, Barbarian, and Fresh. And that worked. He sent me the link and the password. And now I've watched it twice. Once on a TV with a decent speaker plugged in, and then once on my computer with headphones on, just so I could really get the full effect of the sound as well as a better grasp on the story. And the short film is only 27 minutes long, so it's not that big of a sacrifice. So what's wild about this film, if I'm not mistaken, it's Mike Pecci's directorial debut, and he also wrote and produced it. And it's loosely based off the story from the 1980s when there's some Russians drilling into the ground, and then there was this hoax story that came out that they could hear the sounds of hell, basically people wailing when they drilled deep enough, so 12 kilometers deep. So he took that story and ran with it, which is awesome. And the fact that it's his directorial debut and this movie's completely in Russian, wild. Also, if you listen to the Parasite podcast that I did, you would know that I really hate when movies just have a ton of subtitles, because it makes it harder for me to pay attention to what's going on screen, and I really hate the actual act of reading. I'm not a super quick reader, so that bothers me. But this movie, you have enough time to read the subtitles and take in what's going on. But when I'm taking notes for the podcast, I have to keep pausing it, because if I look down for a second, I can't listen to the Russian and know what they're saying. So that was challenging. So this movie centers around Edek, who is the son of one of the 2 people who were in charge of this whole project of drilling down into the earth. And Edek is showing up in the beginning of this film to basically tell them to shut down the project as a giant waste of time. And then we come to find out that his dad passed away in his sleep 3 days earlier. They completely ignore his demands for the project to be shut down and continue drilling anyway, and shit hits the fan. When Edek is talking to the professor, he says how he had to bribe his pilot to fly him to this hellhole, which I think is funny, knowing the history that people were saying that they could hear the wailing from hell from this hole. So we quickly see that there is this black oil substance that one of the workers coughs up, and they keep showing imagery of black oil, and it looks like it's infecting a body. And the more we see this oil substance, we can tell that it is infecting people. And then once these people have been infected by this oil, once they hear the sounds from the drilling, then basically they're being possessed by whatever type of hive mind this oil really is. When Edek goes to shut off the power and he's looking down in, I guess, what would be their basement in this, hole in the ground, he's looking and he finds these boxes that are labeled, and then there's one that says 12K, which is covered in oil. And, he's like, oh, more lies or whatever, as he's thinking it's oil on the ground. And, he probably thinks that they've struck oil and they're going to have a lot of money. They're just not telling him about it. Or he could have thought that they hadn't gotten to 12 kilometers yet. And my theory is that his dad was the one who was handling that box, because he died in his sleep. So I'm guessing he was infected, went home with the stuff, and then passed from it. Not only does Edek touch the oil, but then it also drips into his face, so he's infected. Back upstairs, we've got the worker who takes off his mining hat and the dust comes out, and then he's brushing his hair and you can see the little particles spread around. Then there's a close-up of a nostril. People are just getting infected, and then they turn on that microphone system, and it seems like it activates that oil to possess and consume the person that it's already infected. The workers who've been infected gather around that hole, and that scene is super cool as they crank up the intensity. The people are just spazzing out, and they look like they're just worshiping this hole and completely giving themselves over to this entity, which is creepy. When Daniil is trying to get the American sound equipment to work, which, fun fact, I heard Mike Pecci on a podcast saying he couldn't find any of that gear in Russian, so they got English stuff and then worked it into the story. Anyways, when he's saying that he's struggling to get it working, the professor says, like, do your best and let God do the rest, basically. And he said, maybe I should ask God for some electricity. And it's interesting because at that very moment, we've got Edict going to cut the electricity because he's hearing the voice in his head, which leads me to believe that he has already been infected before even coming down into that mine. He probably got a little bit from his dad. I assume he went to go see his dad after he passed, but maybe not. Maybe just being down in that hole immediately infected him. But it's interesting, he said, ask God for the electricity because as soon as the electricity gets cut, Edict passes. I really love the effect of the black oil when the sound is cranked up and it pulsates and creates a new structure. Also at the very end when it's consuming Edict and it just spreads and hardens on his skin, super cool looking. So I wrote that this movie felt a lot like Venom meets Greek mythology. Now hear me out. Venom, obviously it's this black goo symbiote type thing. But the Greek mythology, when he wakes up on the black sand and you can hear the ocean, I think that's representative of the river Styx. And real quick, I could be manufacturing all of this symbolism and it could be not at all what Mike Pesci was talking about, but I think it's fun to imagine it like this. And there's a ton of similarities I'm going to get into. So the black sand seems to be the land before Charon or Charon would transport you down to the river Styx to bring you into the underworld. The river Styx was also said to have power, and that is what Achilles was dipped into that made him super strong, except for his Achilles. And if you remember, the black goo fell onto Edict's eyes, and when he woke up naked, he had perfect vision and no glasses. Now, you could easily chalk that up to, well, he died, and you would assume that when you go to the afterlife, every little bodily issue that you had when you died won't carry on from the jump. I think that black oil could be representative of Charon, who has also been depicted as basically the Grim Reaper, but you are being consumed and taken over to the underworld. It was very hive mind-esque though. It kept using statements like, we wanted you to hear us. We wanted to meet you. We have something to show you. Pretty creepy, yeah? And since I said that this movie is like Venom, that leads me to my joke moral of the story. And that is, when Spider-Man tells you that we should use noise to defeat Venom, you should probably tell him to suck a dick. Now, my review of this short film, I think as far as short films go, it's a 10 out of 10. If I'm comparing it with other movies, even though it's not as long, I would say it's more of a 9 out of 10. And really the only things that held me back from fully loving this movie was the editing. And it's not like a constant thing. It was the choice of music in certain instances. For example, when Daniil pops out from some of the recording gear, the sound that they used felt sort of whimsical, and it immediately took me out of the story. And I also thought when the black oil fell on Enoch's face that would have been a really good moment for kind of a jump scare, because I knew I was on edge during that point. And I felt like it lacked the impact. And, that probably wasn't what they were going for to, have a jump scare. So that is easily forgivable. But again, that kind of took me out of the story because I was like, oh, I would have done something a little bit different. But I thought this movie was visually stunning and the use of anamorphic lenses was perfect and added that vintage feel to it. I really loved that. Also, I gotta say, when he woke up in the black sand and then the figure is running past him, That shit was creepy. I like that. That was awesome. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today on the short film 12 Kilometers. You should definitely reach out to Mike Pecci on Instagram if you want to see it and send him your top 3 favorite horror movies. And Mike, if you're listening, thank you for sharing this film with me. If you like this episode of the podcast, leave me a thumbs up. Comment if you've seen this film down below and what you thought about it. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next one.